Hey, it's Laurie. I'm so happy you stopped by today. I'm making a Winter Snowflake Gnome, a Farmhouse Christmas wreath, and a Holiday Snowman. I tried to use mostly Dollar Tree supplies, and I did add in a few things that I had on hand. And as always, I hope you have fun crafting with me, so let's get busy. To start my snowflake winter gnome, I'm using 2 of the tinsel boots, and I found these at the Dollar Tree. I'm painting mine white so they look like they're covered in snow, and I'm using some white spray paint. To hide the red, I ended up spraying them 3 times. I made sure they were completely dry, and now I'm going to attach them together. I'm using a piece of floral wire, and I'm sliding it between the tinsel on the 2 boots. I'm now sliding the other end of the wire over and through the boots. Now that I have it pulled through, I'm twisting the wires together. I keep weaving my wire back and forth through the tinsel, attaching the top of the boots together. When I'm done, I wrap the 2 wire ends together and then just fold the excess over into the boot. For the body and the beard of my gnome, I'm using a blue and white duster from the Dollar Tree. I removed it from the packaging and then I just shook it out. The handle is just a bit too long, so I'm marking 3 inches from where the handle and the duster meet on the bottom. And then I just clipped off the top. On the bottom side of the duster, when you push away the microfiber, there's a tiny plastic end. To attach it, I'm placing a generous amount of hot glue in between and on the top of the boots. I'm then placing that short end in between the 2 and into the hot glue, and then I'm just holding it in place until it sets up. It's actually pretty sturdy, but I do want to give it a little more support, so I'm using 1 of the plastic spoons from the Dollar Tree. My gnome is pretty tall, so I'm using the longest spoon, and I'm cutting it off just before the serving end. On the back of the gnome, I'm clearing a path in the microfiber so there's a straight line to the handle. I'm adding some hot glue onto the top of the boots and a straight line heading upwards. I'm now taking the handle from the spoon, I'm placing it on top of the boots in the glue and then pressing it into the microfiber against the handle. I then hit it by fluffing the microfiber around it. To cover the top of my gnome, I'm using this pretty blue and white snowflake wreath from the Dollar Tree. I want to fill out the top and just fluff it out a bit, so I'm using a handful of polyfill. I pushed it inside and filled out the top. To attach the gnome's hat, I'm placing the end of the duster up inside and making sure the end lands against my snowflake. Now that I have it exactly where I want it, I'm using my hot glue gun to attach it. By doing this, the back of the gnome's hat will be longer than the front. To give the hat a bit more of a wintry vibe, I'm using 1 of the white dusting pads from the Dollar Tree. On the back, there are 3 stitched sections, and I'm cutting mine down the center. I'm going to start on the front and push away as many strands as possible, and then I'm going to cut it right in the middle. I'm now turning it over, and to prevent as many flyaways as possible, because once you start cutting it, there is like a million strands, so I'm working my fingers through the microfiber and then I'm cutting a straight line. This was the easiest way that I found to do it, and it prevented me from having a ton of fuzz everywhere. Now that I'm done, I have my 2 individual pieces, and I'm going to add them onto the hat. I'm using my hot glue gun and adding some to the bottom part of the hat, and then I'm placing my white fabric just below the design. I'm turning my gnome over, adding on some hot glue, and attaching my second piece. So that I don't have to cut it, I'm hot gluing the ends right next to my first piece. With those in place, I added some hot glue to the back of the gnome and then attached down the back of the hat. To make the gnome's nose, you can pretty much use anything you'd like. I'm using a styrofoam ball, and I did find this at the Dollar Tree. It kind of looks like a snowball to me, but before I attach it, I'm going to give it a coat of Mod Podge. To make it easier to paint, I just popped a wooden skewer in the bottom. Now that it's dry, I'm placing it under the hat in the center of the gnome, and I'm just hot gluing it into place. I'm adding a snowflake accent onto the gnome's hat, and I'm using 2 different snowflakes from the Dollar Tree. I'm attaching one over the other, and on the bottom snowflake there's a little hanger hole, so I'm hiding it with the top snowflake. I'm adding some hot glue onto the snowflake on the gnome's hat and then attaching the top snowflake. I'm using 2 of the large snowballs from the Dollar Tree to fill in the back holes on the gnome's boots. I didn't use any glue or anything, I just stuffed one in each opening. After I placed them in, I thought it kind of looked like the snowman's bottom, so I thought that was kind of cute. I'm making some arms for my gnome, and I'm using one of the children's matching blue hats from the Dollar Tree. You can always buy 2 of the snowflake hats and use that instead. I folded the hat down and I'm cutting off about 2 inches or so. I'm cutting off the shark, and I'm going to hang on to this because you never know, I may use it in a later project. I opened up the fabric and I'm attaching a small amount of polyfill in the center. After stretching it out in the hot glue, I then added some glue and folded the 2 sides into each other. I made sure to use a finger protector as I was adding the glue and folding the fabric over because it would be super easy to get burned. With everything glued together, my arms are now complete. My gnome is holding a cup, and I'm using a plastic one. I actually picked this up at a yard sale a while back. I want it to be white, so I gave it a coat of white acrylic paint. To make the cocoa in the cup, I'm using a small styrofoam ball. This came out of the same package that I used to make the gnome's nose. I used some brown paint that looked like hot chocolate, and I gave it a coat. I need to fill the cup up just a bit, so I'm using a small amount of my leftover polyfill. I added some hot glue into the cup and I just stuffed it in. I have my chocolate styrofoam ball. We know it's not really chocolate, and I'm placing some hot glue on top of the polyfill, and I'm placing the ball inside. To make sure that it doesn't move out of place, I did add some hot glue around the edges. To hide the hot glue and to make it look like it's not a little scoop of ice cream, I'm using the same brown acrylic paint, and I'm painting around the inside of the cup. I'm adding 3 small snowflake accents into my hot cocoa, and I pulled them out of this container of holiday candy sprinkles. To attach them, I'm using some of the Dollar Tree liquid adhesive. I added on 3 dots and then attached the snowflakes. To attach the cup or the mug to the gnome's hands, I'm first folding my arms in half and cutting them. I'm using the fabric which will become the gnome's hand, and I'm sliding it through the handle and then gluing it back onto itself. I'm attaching the second hand by first folding the fabric over and attaching it so it has a finished end. I added on some hot glue and then attached it directly across from the other hand. I'm adding the words Cocoa Time onto my mug, and I printed this out on my Cricut. If you don't have a Cricut, you can always use some of the sticker letters from the Dollar Tree. To attach the arms onto my gnome, I first made sure that the beard was nice and neat. I then centered the mug and tucked each arm up under the hat. I then hot glued both of them in place. And now that I'm done, this sweet gnome is ready for a long winter. I wanted to share with you today that I'm participating in my monthly friend collab group. It's being hosted by two of my sweet friends, Liana from Liana DIY, and our guest host is Nadia from DIY with Nadia. They both have amazing channels and you can check them out along with my other crafty friends. I'll have the playlist linked below in my description. If you're new to my channel, please consider clicking on that little red subscribe button below and leaving me a thumbs up. And to all my returning friends, you know I am always so happy to see you. To start my Farmhouse Christmas wreath, I'm using one of the 14-inch wire wreath forms from the Dollar Tree. I'm also using from the kitchen department at the Dollar Tree 3 flour sack towels. I'm starting by using one and I'm opening it up, and it's a really big piece of fabric. Before I start cutting it into strips, I'm removing the finished edges. The strips will have a slight fray, and if I leave the finished edges, you might see them on the wreath. I opened my fabric up, and honestly, one thing I loved about making this wreath is you don't have to be perfect. I cut out 9-inch strips, and they were about an inch wide. Some ended up being a little wider, some a little thinner, but I did make sure that they all ended up at 9 inches in length. Oh, and some of my edges, they weren't perfect either. I'm adding my first strip around the outside 2 wires. I'm making sure that the ends match up, and then I'm just tying the fabric into a knot. I made sure it was pushed up tightly against the support, and now I'm adding on my second piece. I wrapped it around the 2 inside wires, and once again I made sure the ends matched up, and then I just tied it into a knot. I'm adding on my third, wrapping it around the 2 middle wires, making sure the ends match up, and then tying it into a knot. I keep adding the strips of cloth, making sure to push them tightly together, and I continued doing this until I filled out the section. I'm adding on some simple ribbon accents, and I'm using a 1 1/2 inch buffalo check ribbon. This I picked up at Michael's. If you have the 2 1/2 inch that's sold at Dollar Tree, that will work just as well. In addition to the buffalo check ribbon, I'm using a 2-inch burlap ribbon from the Dollar Tree. I'm cutting 8 9-inch pieces of the buffalo check ribbon. And I'm cutting 14 pieces of the 2-inch burlap ribbon. I'm using 6 pieces of the buffalo check and 12 of the burlap ribbon on my wreath. The other 5 pieces, they'll become my bow. I'm adding 1 piece of buffalo check and 2 pieces of burlap onto my wreath. Just like the strips of fabric, I'm wrapping each piece of burlap, one on the outside and one on the inside. But instead of tying them on with a knot, I'm just tying them on with one tie. I then added on my buffalo check ribbon around the 2 middle wires and then pushed all 3 tightly against the fabric. With those in place, I then continued on adding my strips of fabric. My next section is complete, so I'm adding on the 2 pieces of burlap and my buffalo check ribbon. I continued following the same pattern around the form, adding the ribbon at every section until my wreath was complete. Now that I'm done, I'm working my way around the wreath and I'm fluffing out the ribbons. If I find anything that's a bit overly frayed, I'm just snipping it off with my scissors. I found this cute Be Merry sign at the Dollar Tree, and I'm removing the hanger and the red bow. I found its placement in the center of my wreath, and then I just hot glued it into place. Mine attached without a problem, but if you need more support, just run a small piece of wood across the back. I'm making a really simple bow for my wreath, and I'm using 3 pieces of the buffalo check ribbon and 2 of the burlap. I'll be attaching them together with a piece of floral wire. I started with the buffalo check and then alternated the ribbons. I folded them in half to find my center and then wrapped the piece of floral wire around it and twisted it tightly on the back. I fluffed out the ribbons and then snipped off the excess wire. To finish up, I placed hot glue over the greenery on my sign and attached the bow. And now this pretty farmhouse wreath is ready for the holidays. To start my snowman, I'm using 2 of the bamboo hoops from the Dollar Tree. To cover them, I'm using 2 of the microfiber dusting pads, and these came from the Dollar Tree as well. On the back, there are 3 sewn separate sections, and I'm going to be cutting down the center. I'm starting to cut, and as I do, I'm moving the microfiber away with my fingers so I don't cut it. I'm working it away underneath, and I'm doing the best I can to keep it away from my scissors. If you end up cutting it, you will have a million pieces everywhere. I have my 2 pieces, and I'm covering my largest hoop. To attach it, I'm placing some hot glue on the bottom side of the pad and placing down the hoop. I place some hot glue inside the hoop, and now I'm attaching the two sides together. To add my second piece, I'm matching it up against the first and following the same instructions. When I come to the end, I'm just a little bit short, so I'm cutting the next microfiber pad in half, and I'm just going to use a little piece of that. The bottom of my snowman is complete, and now I'm making the top the exact same way. When I came to the end, I did have a little extra piece, so I just snipped that off and continued hot gluing the rest on. With both of them complete, I used my scissors to clean them up and give them both more of a rounded appearance. I'm attaching the two together by placing a generous amount of hot glue on top of the larger hoop, and then attaching the smaller one. When I had the two together, I gave them a good squish and I held them together about a minute or so until the hot glue set up. Instead of adding on the traditional snowman's hat, I'm using two candy canes from a Dollar Tree headband. I used my clippers and I snipped both of them off from the base. I'm attaching both to the top of the snowman's head, and I just turned it around to make it easier to glue. I'm filling in the snowman's face and stomach, and I'm using some craft sticks. I'm using 6 6-inch, 6 8-inch, and 2 10-inch, but in total I'll be actually using 3 10-inch, one for the snowman's nose. I'm attaching my craft sticks together using my Starbond thick glue. It sets up natural wood super quick, and if you'd like to give it a try, I do have it linked below in my description. I added a generous amount on my large craft stick, and then I placed my 6-inch craft sticks down in a row. I then did the same for my 8-inch craft sticks. As I was adding them, I tried to keep them as straight as possible. I'm placing the smaller sticks behind the snowman's head and marking the circle with my pencil. As I was marking it, I pushed against the inside, making sure that the circle was larger than the snowman's head. I cut it out. It's not a perfect circle, but close enough. I then did the same for the bottom of the snowman. With my two circles cut out, I then gave them both a coat of white acrylic paint. With both of my pieces dry, I'm placing the smallest circle into the back of the snowman's head, and then I'm just kind of tucking it in just a bit. When I have it in place, I'm turning my snowman over and hot gluing it to the edges. I placed my larger circle behind the bottom of my snowman, tucked it in just a bit, turned my snowman over, and glued it to the edges. I placed the large craft stick onto my snowman's face to get an idea of how big I wanted to make his nose. I then cut it out in the shape of a carrot. I used some orange acrylic paint and I gave it a coat. While that's drying, I went and grabbed my button jar and I'm going to give him classic black eyes and buttons. So I picked out 2 for the eyes and 3 for the front. I found their placement on the snowman and attached them with some E6000. I found the placement for the snowman's eyes and I attached those as well. I'm adding on the carrot nose and I'm hot gluing this in place. I'm making a scarf for my snowman and I'm using a pair of the red and white knee socks from the Dollar Tree. I cut off the toe and glued one inside the other. I made sure the heel was on the bottom and then I wrapped it around my snowman's neck. I then added on some hot glue to help hold it in place. You can always leave the scarf ends as is. I rolled mine under just to give it a little bit more of a finished look. I headed outside and cut a couple of sticks off of a tree and I'm using these as my snowman's arms. I tucked them under his body and hot glued them onto the back. I covered the arms on the back with 2 white strips of fabric. This just helped hold them in place. I'm decorating the snowman's scarf just using some things that I had on hand. I'm first hot gluing on a Dollar Tree snowflake. I then added on a piece of holly and followed that up with a white poinsettia. To give it a pop of color, I then added some small red berries in the center of the flower. I thought I was done, but I was looking at the snowman's nose and I wanted it to kind of pop. So I grabbed my pencil and I started shading around the outside of it. I rubbed it in and I made some lines on it so it looked a little more like a realistic carrot. I added a wire hanger to the back and with those finishing touches, my holiday snowman is ready to hang. Here we are at the end of the video, and I hope you had fun crafting these winter and Christmas DIYs with me. Be sure to check out the friend playlist, and if you're new to my channel and you're thinking, hey, I'd like to come back and hang out with her again, don't forget to click that little red subscribe button below. I hope you all stay safe and healthy, and I'll see you next time. Bye, everybody!